Chosen one, I see that you have been wandering. Yes, I see that you have been wandering. Not because you are weak, not because you lack faith, but because you were born for more, and your spirit has been suffocating in a life that does not match your calling. You have felt it late at night, the quiet frustration, the hunger for progress, the pain of knowing you are not meant to stay here, yet not seeing the door open yet. Chosen one, you did not click this video by accident. This is not random content. This is a divine appointment. Heaven aligned this moment because you are standing at the edge of a breakthrough you can no longer delay. The waiting season was not punishment, it was preparation. As it is written in Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 3, the vision waits for the appointed time, but it will surely come. If you stay with me until the end of this message, you will understand why your struggle has not been wasted, why success must become your lifestyle now, and why this is your last chance to rise into the wealth and authority you were designed to carry. Chosen one, if your spirit feels stirred, subscribe to this channel and comment 777 below as your declaration. Promise yourself you will watch this all the way through, and you will see clearly that God has never abandoned you, not for a single moment. Chosen one. The reason this moment feels heavy is because something in you already knows the truth. You have reached the place where waiting quietly is no longer faith, and drifting gently is no longer patience. What you have been calling endurance has started to feel like delay, and what you once named trust has slowly turned into exhaustion. This is not because you are failing. It is because heaven is pressing you toward movement. For a long time you told yourself, when God is ready, it will happen. And that was true for a season. But there comes a moment when God stops speaking through signs and starts speaking through friction. You feel restless, you feel dissatisfied, you feel an urgency you cannot explain. That is not anxiety, that is alignment beginning to tighten. When the calling gets louder than the comfort, heaven is no longer asking you to wait, it is asking you to respond. Let me say this gently, anointed one. You were never meant to live your life hoping things would change. You were meant to live in a way that produces evidence that change is already happening. Faith was never designed to replace action. Faith was designed to fuel it. And one of the first ways heaven awakens you is by allowing you to taste a win again. Not a massive breakthrough, not a miracle that shocks everyone. A small, undeniable victory that reminds your spirit, I can move, I can build, I can finish. When I was in my lowest season, I remember praying for clarity, praying for direction, praying for peace. But what God gave me instead was one small responsibility I could not escape. Something simple, something measurable, something that required me to show up even when I felt nothing. At the time it felt insignificant, but that small win changed the chemistry of my mind. It broke the lie that I was stuck, and once that lie broke, momentum entered. Chosen one, heaven often restores confidence before it restores circumstances. Winning is not arrogance. Winning is remembrance. It reminds you who you are. Losing, on the other hand, becomes a habit when you repeatedly tell yourself that effort does not matter. And the most dangerous place for a chosen soul is not failure. It is becoming comfortable with mediocrity while still calling it faith. Ask yourself this without shame and without excuses. Are your daily habits producing life, or are they quietly draining it? Are you building rhythms that move you forward, or routines that help you avoid responsibility? This is not a judgment. This is an invitation, because the moment you become honest about this, heaven can begin to partner with you again. You do not need to fix everything at once. God has never asked for that. He asks for alignment, not perfection. Pick one area of your life where you know the truth. the place that bothers you when you are alone, the place you avoid thinking about because it exposes your inconsistency. That is not condemnation, that is the doorway. Over the next 30 days, what would a real win look like there? Not a fantasy, not a promise. A result that can be seen, measured and respected by your own conscience. For some, that win will be physical, showing up for your body again. For others, it will be financial, tracking what you avoid tracking. For others, it will be discipline, doing what you said you would do even when no one is watching. These wins are not about impressing people. They are about restoring trust with yourself. And when self-trust returns, spiritual authority follows. There was a time in my journey when discipline was my weakest muscle. I loved vision, I loved purpose, I loved prophecy, but I struggled with consistency. And I learned something humbling. God does not withhold blessings because you are unworthy. He withholds them because you are unprepared to sustain them. So I built structure, not because it was spiritual, but because it was necessary. And that structure created alignment. Alignment created momentum. Momentum created results. Anointed one. This is where many people miss it. They think success is a feeling. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel confident. They wait to feel inspired. But success is not a feeling. It is evidence. It is fruit. It is proof that something in the physical world has shifted because of your obedience. Numbers do not lie. Results do not manipulate. Evidence does not flatter. Look at your life honestly. The outcomes you are experiencing are not punishments. They are messages. They are revealing what decisions have been shaping your days. This is not about blaming your past, your family, or your environment. It is about reclaiming your authority. When something in your life is not producing growth, heaven is not asking you to tolerate it longer. Heaven is asking you to measure it and decide. I had to learn to stop asking, why does this feel wrong, and start asking, what would success look like here? And when I finally answered that question, my focus changed. I stopped chasing feelings and started building evidence. That shift changed everything. Chosen one. This is not about becoming cold or robotic. This is about becoming grounded. When you track what matters, confusion loses its power. When you measure progress, discouragement has less room to breathe. You begin to see clearly where to invest your energy and where to withdraw it. This is wisdom, not ambition. And as you do this, something sacred begins to happen. Momentum makes obedience easier. What once felt heavy becomes natural. The first step is always the hardest, not because you are weak, but because resistance always fights birth. Once movement begins, heaven adds weight to your steps. There were seasons when showing up felt lonely, when progress felt invisible, when obedience felt unrewarded. But those moments built something deeper than motivation. They built trust. Trust in myself. Trust in the process. Trust that God was working even when results were quiet. And now, looking back, I would never trade those moments. They were the foundation. If you are struggling right now, let me speak this over you. It does get better. Not magically, not suddenly, but faithfully. Hold on long enough to see one result, just one. And once you do, you will never want to return to the version of you that lived on hope alone. This is the moment where heaven is not asking for more prayer, but more alignment. Not more waiting, but more movement. And as you continue, you will begin to understand why this season feels different, why the urgency feels real, why the comfort you once had no longer satisfies. Something is shifting, and you are strong enough to carry it. Chosen one. There comes a moment when heaven stops negotiating with your comfort and starts reclaiming your authority. This is that moment. You have prayed long enough. You have waited long enough. You have hoped long enough. And now what God is after is not another promise from your lips, but ownership in your spirit. Let me speak plainly but gently. You were never meant to live your life at the mercy of circumstances. You were never meant to surrender control and call it surrender to God. There is a difference. Surrender to God brings clarity, courage, and direction. Surrender to fear brings delay, confusion, and dependence. And many chosen ones get stuck here, mistaking passivity for faith. Control has been misunderstood, even spiritualized away. You have been told that wanting control means you do not trust God, that taking ownership means you are operating in pride. That structure kills spirituality. But that is not truth. That is distortion. God is a God of order, not chaos. And when He entrusts someone with purpose, He also entrusts them with responsibility. Ask yourself this, honestly anointed one, who is currently deciding how your days are spent? Who is determining your income, your growth, your schedule, your health, your future? If the answer is someone else or no one, then that is not humility, that is abdication. And heaven does not reward abdication. Heaven responds to stewardship. I remember a season when I felt deeply spiritual but deeply powerless. I prayed often, I listened to messages, I waited for direction, but my life was not moving. And one day it became clear to me, I had handed over control of my outcomes while still asking God for the results. I wanted provision without process, favor without responsibility. And God in His mercy did not give me what I asked for. He gave me awareness. Chosen one, wishing is not faith. Hoping without action is not trust. Waiting without obedience is not patience. Real outcomes do not come from crossed fingers and whispered prayers alone. They come when prayer gives birth to action, when belief produces structure, when faith begins to move your hands. Think about the areas of your life where you feel the most frustration: your finances, your health, your time, your relationships. Now ask yourself, where do I lack control here? Not control over people, control over decisions, control over standards, control over boundaries, control over inputs. Wherever control is missing, chaos will eventually speak. This is why control feels like an ultimate high. Not because it feeds ego, but because it restores dignity. When you are in control of what matters, you no longer feel helpless. You no longer feel at the mercy of the world. You no longer feel like life is happening to you instead of through you. That is not arrogance, that is alignment. There was a time when I was ashamed of wanting control. I was told to let go, to trust, to wait. And while those words sounded spiritual, they left me powerless. But the moment I reclaimed responsibility, everything shifted. Not because I stopped trusting God, but because I started partnering with Him. God does not override your will. He works through it. Imagine giving up control of your income and expecting peace. Imagine letting someone else decide your worth and calling it humility. Imagine waiting for a perfect opportunity to be delivered to you while ignoring the skills you refuse to develop. That is not faith. That is avoidance dressed in spiritual language. Chosen. Successful people do not wait to be told what to do with their lives. They ask better questions. They seek clarity. They identify gaps. They take responsibility for what they do not yet know. And this is not because they are special. It is because they are willing. Every result you see in the physical world is a reflection of decisions made consistently over time. This is true in business. This is true in health. This is true in relationships. Growth is not mysterious. It is measurable. And when something is not growing, it is not because God has forgotten you. It is because something in the system needs to change. Let me ground this in something real. There were seasons where my progress was slow, not because I lacked favor, but because I was solving the wrong problems. I was busy but not effective, spiritual but not disciplined, inspired but not consistent. And the moment I started measuring what mattered, clarity replaced confusion. Numbers told me the truth when emotions tried to lie. Chosen. One, feelings are powerful, but they are not reliable leaders. Emotions can comfort you while keeping you stuck. Data, evidence, and results do not do that. They reveal, they confront, they guide. When you begin to track what matters in your life, you stop guessing and start building. If your income is not increasing, that is information. If your health is declining, that is information. If your relationships feel disconnected, that is information. Do not shame yourself with it. Use it. Heaven speaks through truth, not flattery. And here is where momentum becomes sacred. The first step is always the hardest. It requires belief without proof, obedience without applause, discipline without reward. But once momentum begins, commitment becomes easier. What once felt forced becomes natural. What once felt heavy becomes habitual. I remember when showing up felt like war. Early mornings, hard choices, quiet sacrifices, no recognition, no immediate payoff. But those moments built something deeper than motivation. They built identity. And once identity shifts, behavior follows. Chosen one. The hardest part is not the work, it is the beginning. Once you break through that initial resistance, life begins to pull you forward instead of pushing you back. Momentum becomes your ally. And with momentum comes confidence. Not loud confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that comes from knowing you can keep your word to yourself. Let me tell you something important. Confidence does not come from success. Success comes from confidence built in private, from the moments you chose to act when quitting was easier, from the days you showed up without validation, from the decisions you made when no one was watching. If you are struggling right now, this does not disqualify you, it qualifies you. Because only those who have felt resistance understand the value of movement. Hold on long enough to see one result, one confirmation, one measurable win. And once you do, you will not want to return to the version of yourself that lived on hope alone. Chosen one. This is not about becoming obsessed with money. It is about becoming aligned with responsibility. Wealth follows stewardship, authority follows discipline, and freedom follows ownership. Heaven is not asking you to rush, it is asking you to rise, step by step, decision by decision, with clarity, courage, and control. And as you do, you will begin to feel it. Not hype, not emotion, but something deeper, stability, direction, peace. That is how you know you are moving in alignment. Chosen one. There is a truth many are afraid to say out loud because it removes excuses and replaces them with responsibility. Momentum is not luck. Momentum is not talent. Momentum is obedience repeated until resistance loses its voice. And when momentum begins to move through your life, commitment no longer feels like force. It feels like flow. Most people believe they lack discipline, but that is not the real problem. What they lack is momentum. Discipline without momentum feels like punishment. Discipline with momentum feels like alignment, and heaven understands this. That is why God rarely asks you to leap first. He asks you to move, even if the movement is small, even if it feels unimpressive, even if no one notices. There is a moment in every chosen one's life when the path divides quietly. One path continues with inspiration, videos, prayers, and waiting. The other path begins with repetition, structure, and responsibility. Both paths feel spiritual at first, but only one produces fruit. Only one builds evidence. Only one carries you out of survival and into stewardship. I remember when movement felt unnatural to me. Not because I was lazy, but because I was afraid of committing to something that might not work. I wanted certainty before action, but certainty never comes first. Momentum does. And momentum does not require confidence. It creates it. When you begin to repeat the right actions consistently, something shifts internally. Your mind stops arguing. Your emotions stop negotiating. Your identity begins to align with your behavior. You no longer ask, "Can I do this?" You begin to say, "This is what I do," and that shift is holy. Chosen one. Heaven does not build lives on motivation. Motivation is unstable. It rises and falls with emotion. Heaven builds lives on patterns. Patterns create identity. Identity produces authority. This is why the early steps feel uncomfortable. They are challenging the old identity that kept you safe but small. Think about the habits you currently have, not the ones you talk about, the ones you live. Habits are not neutral. They either move you forward or they quietly anchor you to the past. And the most dangerous habits are not destructive ones. They are comfortable ones that produce no growth. There was a season when my habits were not sinful, but they were stagnant. I was not doing anything wrong. I was simply not doing enough of the right things. And that realization was painful because it removed my ability to blame circumstances. It forced me to confront patterns. Chosen one momentum multiplies when your environment supports your obedience. You cannot expect to rise while staying surrounded by habits, people, and routines that belong to your old season. This is not rejection. This is alignment. When God prepares to elevate you, He begins to rearrange who and what has access to you. This is why some relationships feel uncomfortable now. Some conversations feel shallow. Some environments feel heavy. It is not because you have changed in arrogance. It is because your spirit is growing. And growth requires different soil. Let me ground this in something practical. When you place yourself among people who honor discipline, discipline becomes normal. When you surround yourself with those who value growth, growth becomes expected. When you choose environments that demand more from you, your standards rise without constant effort. This is not manipulation. This is wisdom. The hardest part of becoming successful is not sustaining it. It is starting. It is the season where your actions are not yet rewarded, where belief must carry you instead of results, where you must trust that obedience will eventually speak for itself. These are the moments that build spiritual muscle. I think back to the days when showing up felt heavy. Early mornings, long hours, little validation. There were days I questioned whether it mattered, but those moments were not wasted. They were forming trust. Trust in my word. Trust in my capacity. Trust that I could continue even when it was uncomfortable. Chosen one. Confidence is not built in victory. It is built in repetition during uncertainty. The confidence you admire in others did not appear overnight. It was forged in moments no one applauded. Moments where quitting would have been understandable. Moments where faith had to be lived, not spoken. And here is the truth many avoid. The reason some people never move forward is not because they are incapable. It is because they refuse to endure the temporary discomfort of growth. They want progress without pressure, identity without initiation, harvest without planting. Momentum does not arrive dramatically, it arrives quietly. One completed task, one kept promise, one day of showing up when you wanted to withdraw, and over time these small acts begin to pull you forward. The same way gravity works. You no longer have to push as hard. Life begins to move with you instead of against you. Chosen one. When momentum builds, your relationship with effort changes. What once felt exhausting becomes familiar. What once required willpower becomes routine. This is not because the work changed, it is because you did. There was a time when I had to convince myself to act. Now action feels like alignment, not because I am special, but because I stayed long enough for momentum to take hold. And anyone can do this, but not everyone will. Let me speak to the part of you that feels tired. It is okay to feel weary. Weariness does not disqualify you, but stagnation will. You cannot remain in the same patterns and expect heaven to override your choices. God honors obedience, not intention alone. If you are still here listening to this, something in you knows this is true. You are not broken, you are not late, but you are being invited to rise beyond inspiration into embodiment, beyond believing into becoming. Chosen. One momentum is not about speed, it is about direction. Even slow movement in the right direction changes everything. Stay long enough to see one result, just one, and when you do, something irreversible happens. You realize you are not stuck. You were simply uncommitted to movement. This is not condemnation, this is liberation, because once you see that movement is possible, hope becomes grounded, faith becomes practical, and obedience becomes lighter. Heaven is not asking you to do everything today, it is asking you to do something consistently, to show up again, to keep your word, to honor the calling not just with belief, but with behavior. Chosen one, you are not behind, you are being built. But building requires repetition, it requires patience, it requires courage. And as you continue, you will feel it. The resistance will soften, the doubt will quiet, the path will become clearer. This is how momentum feels when it begins to carry you. Chosen one. There is a reason this part of the journey feels confrontational to your spirit. Because now we are touching the place where identity and authority meet. Control, not the kind people fear, not the kind born from insecurity, but the kind that restores order where chaos once lived. You were taught subtly or directly that wanting control meant you lacked faith, that if you truly trusted God, you would simply let life happen. But that teaching left many chosen ones spiritually sensitive and practically powerless. And heaven never designed you to live powerless. Control is not domination. Control is stewardship. Control is saying, I will no longer abandon my life to chance, and then ask God to fix what I refuse to manage. When God gives vision, He also gives responsibility. When He reveals purpose, He expects ownership. Look at the areas of your life where frustration is loudest. Those areas are not cursed, they are ungoverned. Wherever control is absent, anxiety multiplies. Wherever boundaries are weak, confusion grows. Wherever standards are undefined, disappointment becomes familiar. There was a time in my life when I blamed circumstances for my lack of progress. I blamed timing, I blamed people, I blamed the season. But the truth was simpler and harder. I was not in control of the things that mattered. My time was reactive, my energy was scattered, my decisions were inconsistent, and I was asking God to bless a structure I had never built. Chosen one. God is not offended by your desire to take control of your life. He is offended when you refuse to take responsibility and call it humility. There is a difference between surrendering to God and surrendering your authority. One brings freedom, the other brings stagnation. Think about this carefully. Does hoping, wishing, and waiting feel good anymore? Does crossing your fingers and praying something will magically change bring peace? Or does it quietly drain you? Hope without movement eventually becomes despair. Prayer without obedience eventually becomes noise. Real outcomes do not come from passivity. They come from clarity. They come from knowing what you are building, why you are building it, and what you will no longer tolerate. This is not harsh. This is holy. Imagine giving up control of your income and expecting peace, allowing someone else to decide your worth and calling it trust. Waiting for permission to grow while feeling resentment toward those who moved without it. That internal conflict is not spiritual warfare, it is misalignment. Chosen. Successful people do not relinquish control of their lives to others. They do not wait for perfect instructions to appear. They self-identify what they need to learn. They ask uncomfortable questions. They close gaps. They take responsibility for what they do not yet know. And here is the truth that will either free you or confront you. Control brings results. Results bring confidence. Confidence quiets fear. Fear is loud when control is missing. When I finally took ownership of my decisions, something shifted internally. I stopped feeling like life was happening to me. I started feeling like I was participating in it. That shift was not dramatic, it was grounding. Peace entered where anxiety once lived. Chosen one. This is why control feels like an ultimate high. Not because it feeds ego, but because it restores dignity. You stop feeling like a victim of circumstance and start moving as a steward of destiny. That is when heaven can trust you with more. And let me say this clearly. Wanting control over your health, your finances, your time, your growth is not rebellion against God. It is agreement with Him. God does not micromanage your life. He invites you to manage it wisely. Look at the people who shame ambition, structure, and discipline. Often they are the ones avoiding responsibility. They confuse peace with comfort. They confuse faith with avoidance. And they quietly resent those who rise. Chosen one. You are not called to live reactively. You are called to live intentionally. When you give up control, you do not become spiritual. You become vulnerable to outcomes you do not want. Ask yourself this honestly. What areas of your life feel out of control right now? Not emotionally, practically. Where are the standards unclear? Where are the decisions inconsistent? Where have you been hoping for change without creating structure? These questions are not accusations, they are invitations. Because the moment you reclaim control in one area, momentum follows. Order brings clarity. Clarity brings action. Action produces evidence. There was a time when my income felt unpredictable, stressful, dependent on factors I did not understand, and I realized something. I had not taken control of the skills, systems, and decisions required to change it. I was waiting for opportunity instead of preparing for it. And once I stopped waiting and started learning, control returned. Chosen. One control is not about knowing everything. It is about being willing to figure things out. It is about asking, what do I need to learn, instead of saying, someone should tell me. That mindset shift alone separates those who rise from those who remain dependent. This is why many chosen ones stay spiritually rich but materially stuck. They pray deeply but refuse to build. They believe strongly but avoid structure. They feel called but resist responsibility. And heaven waits patiently, not because it is cruel, but because it will not empower avoidance. Control also means saying no. No to distractions. No to environments that drain you. No to patterns that belong to your old identity. This is not isolation, it is consecration. When God prepares to elevate someone, He narrows their focus. You may feel it now. Less tolerance for chaos. Less patience for excuses, less appetite for what once entertained you. This is not hardness, this is clarity. Chosen one control does not make you rigid, it makes you stable. And stability is the foundation of wealth, peace, and authority. Without it, success collapses under its own weight. As you reclaim control, something else happens. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop chasing signs. You stop begging for confirmation, because your actions begin to speak. Evidence becomes your assurance. Heaven is not asking you to dominate life. It is asking you to steward it, to take responsibility for what you can change and trust God with what you cannot. That balance is where peace lives. If this message feels uncomfortable, that is not rejection. That is recognition. Something in you knows this is the threshold, the moment where belief must become embodiment, where calling must become conduct. Chosen. One control is not the enemy of faith. It is the partner of obedience. And when you embrace it, you will feel something return to you. Not pressure, not fear, authority. And authority changes everything. Chosen one. Everything you have heard up to this point has been leading you here. Not to pressure you, not to frighten you, but to clarify something sacred that many never fully accept. Success was never meant to be a destination you arrive at one day. It was meant to be a lifestyle you embody daily. And until that truth settles into your spirit, wealth will always feel just out of reach. There is a subtle lie that keeps chosen ones trapped. The lie says, once I reach this level, then I'll be consistent. Once I have more money, then I'll be disciplined. Once God blesses me, then I'll live differently. But the kingdom does not work that way. The lifestyle comes first. The evidence follows. I had to learn this the hard way. There were seasons when I believed that success would rescue me from inconsistency, that a breakthrough would finally fix my habits. But breakthroughs do not fix habits. Habits sustain breakthroughs. And when I finally understood this, everything changed. Chosen. One success as a lifestyle means you do not wait for motivation to show up. You do not wait for circumstances to improve. You decide who you are before the world confirms it. You raise your standards quietly. You move differently, even when no one is watching. You treat your calling with reverence, not convenience. This is why success feels heavy to some people. Not because it is hard, but because it demands consistency. And consistency exposes what you truly value. Anyone can act inspired for a moment. Only a few can live aligned over time. Let me speak to the part of you that feels tired, not lazy. Tired. You are not tired because you are doing too much. You are tired because you are carrying too many unresolved decisions. You are constantly negotiating with yourself. Should I show up today? Should I rest? Should I wait? That internal debate drains more energy than disciplined action ever will. When success becomes a lifestyle, the debates end. You no longer ask if you will show up. You simply do. And that simplicity brings peace. Chosen one, success as a lifestyle also means accepting responsibility for your life without bitterness. You stop blaming the past, not because it didn't hurt, but because you refuse to let it dictate your future. Whether you were supported or overlooked, encouraged or doubted, privileged or disadvantaged, the conclusion remains the same. You are responsible for what you build next. This is not cruel. This is empowering. Because responsibility restores agency. It reminds you that your story is still being written, and the chapters ahead are not limited by the chapters behind. There is a reason Scripture speaks of renewing the mind, not once, continually. Because your environment may change, but if your mindset does not, your outcomes won't either. Success as a lifestyle means you continually raise the bar of what you expect from yourself, not out of shame, out of honor. Honor for your calling, honor for your potential, honor for the people who will one day be impacted by your obedience. Chosen one, you are not building success just for yourself. Whether you see it now or not, there are people tied to your courage. There are lives that will draw strength from your example. There are future conversations where someone will say, if they could rise from that, maybe I can too. I did not understand this early on. I thought success was personal, about proving something, about escaping something. But over time I realized it was bigger. People I had never met were watching, drawing hope from a story I was still living. That realization changed how I showed up. My choices mattered more. This is why it is your duty to become successful. Not in arrogance, in service. Because the world is heavy, and examples of discipline, integrity, and perseverance are rare. When chosen ones shrink back, the world grows darker. When they rise, light spreads quietly. Success as a lifestyle also means knowing when to turn off the noise. There will be times when watching another video is not faith, but avoidance. When consuming inspiration replaces creating movement. And the most loving thing you can do for yourself in those moments is to step away and build. Chosen one information without application creates frustration. Revelation without obedience creates restlessness. But action brings peace. Even imperfect action. Especially imperfect action. If you feel conviction right now, let it be gentle. Conviction is not condemnation. It is clarity. It is heaven saying you are capable of more, and it is time to live like it. There are people younger than you, older than you, walking through similar struggles, watching to see if someone will go first. You may never know their names, but your obedience will matter to them, and that makes this moment sacred. Let me say this plainly, it matters that you become successful, not just financially, but in character, consistency, and courage. It matters that you create a life that reflects alignment, not chaos. It matters that you become evidence that faith and discipline can coexist. Chosen one, do not let anyone convince you that striving for excellence is selfish. Excellence is stewardship. Excellence is gratitude in motion. Excellence says, I will not waste what I was given. You are not late, but you are being called to decide. Will success remain something you talk about, pray about, and hope for? Or will it become something you live out quietly, consistently, and faithfully? This is the moment where everything simplifies. Not because the work disappears, but because the confusion does. You know what to do. Not everything, just the next right thing. And when you do it, peace follows. Success is no longer something you chase. It is something you carry. In how you wake up, in how you choose, in how you respond, in how you build. Chosen one. This is your last chance, not because God is threatening you, but because life is inviting you to stop delaying your destiny, to stop spiritualizing avoidance, to stop waiting for permission to become who you already are. Live aligned, live disciplined, live responsible, and watch how heaven responds. Chosen one, as this word comes to a close, know this in your spirit. Nothing you have heard today was accidental, and nothing you are carrying forward is uncertain. Heaven does not speak twice without intention. A transfer has already been set in motion, not because you asked perfectly, but because you aligned faithfully. This is your Kairos moment, the appointed time where obedience meets provision and discipline meets favor. Anointed one, you are not walking away empty. You are leaving this moment sealed with clarity, strengthened with resolve, and marked for elevation. What you chose to take responsibility for heaven is now empowered to multiply. What you committed to steward God is prepared to increase. Stay aligned. Stay faithful in the small things. The momentum you feel is not emotion, it is confirmation. As it is written, those who remain steady will reap in due season if they do not grow weary. And you will not grow weary because you are no longer wandering. You are walking with purpose. Go forward with gratitude for what is already unfolding. Let your life become evidence that faith and discipline walk together. And if this word resonated with your spirit, you may quietly subscribe and comment your city below, not for attention, but as a witness to alignment. Chosen one, remain in peace. Stay obedient. The harvest is closer than you think.